Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Mark Henry. I'm a senior engineer with Opmantic's North American office located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Today we're going to talk about how to deliver what's called a drop and scrape audit using a combination of Opmantic's Open-AudIT and Opie Config products. So if you're joining our GoToWebinar today live, we will be sending you a follow-up email with a link to the copy of the recording. If you found this on Opmantic's YouTube site or on the opmantic.com website, feel free to enjoy the content there. It's free, of course. If you have any questions, if you're on the live session, if you have any questions, feel free to use the GoToWebinar chat or Q&A panel. Depending on which version of the GoToWebinar client you have, it'll depend on how that's named. If you're in the GoToWebinar live, again, when you exit or when the webinar ends, you'll be presented with a short 3-question survey. Please just take a moment of your time to complete that survey. We do review the results, and the input that you give us is valuable. It actually helps us determine what content to do for our future webinars. If you're coming at this from YouTube or GoToWebinar, you can get a copy of this presentation in PDF format. It's available in the GoToWebinar handouts panel. If you're on the YouTube site, please come to opmantic.com and select the Learn option from the menu, and then find this presentation there. And of course, if you're already on opmantic.com, there should be a link at the bottom of the page for this presentation as well. So a few very targeted concepts for us to talk about today. And they all revolve around this idea of how to do a drop and scrape audit. And that's how to install and configure Open-AudIT and Opie Config. Methods for auditing unknown network topologies. So if you're coming into a client site, or if you've just joined a business and you're trying to figure out how to get your arms around what equipment is installed and how it's configured. And finally, we're going to talk about how to use the audit results to really drive business conversations, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about having an audit. It's about what do I do with the information that the audit's given me. So first off, what is a drop and scrape audit? So this is a term, I've heard it kind of coined by several different auditing firms over the years that have done SOC 1 or SOC 2 audits for businesses I've worked at. I've also heard it used by managed service providers. I've even used it myself when I've owned my own MSP in the past. The concept is being able to come into a client site, either install a machine, spin up a VM, maybe join a laptop to the domain, and be able to audit the client network, whether it's over a single visit or over a few days if it's a much larger organization. And be able to understand what hardware is deployed, what are the operating systems and patches, what installed software is out there, what are the device configuration settings, and pull all that information back, and then use that to drive kind of a mature business conversation with the client. A few references for you today. Again, a PDF version of this with all these links is available to you. So a link to the IT Audit Configuration Compliance Bundle on the Opmantic website, so you can save some money by buying a combination of Open-AudIT and Opie Config together. Also, Wiki links for Open-AudIT and Opie Config. Those home pages will get you information on how to do installation, configuration, how to run reports, etc. And if you end up deploying the Opmantic VM or virtual machine, we have a link there as well to the Opmantic VM and how to configure that. If you are not a supported customer and you're just kind of poking around and wanting to look at stuff, you can download Open-AudIT. It comes as both a free and open source community edition and also a paid professional or enterprise license level as well. And the professional edition does come with a 20 device free forever license with it. So you can evaluate the professional edition and see if it's right for you or not. Opie Config, you can get a 20 device free license with that as well. And you can also ask for a 50 device temporary 30-day license to go with Opie Config while you're doing some testing. If you have questions, you can use our community questions board. If you're a supported customer, feel free to email support@opmantic.com. And if you're wanting to do a proof of concept or look at the the opportunities that Open-AudIT and Opie Config can give you at a greater detail, feel free to email our sales team here at usa.mantech.com. If you're outside of North America and you're interested in these products, email the USA team as well, and we'll connect you with your regional sales group. All right, so let's get into what parts are going to make up this solution and all. Really, there are three products at heart here. One of the pieces will be NMIS, not really from a fault and performance management standpoint, but from the idea that Opie Config plugs into NMIS. So they work together to provide a solution. The second piece of that puzzle will be Open-AudIT. You can use the community edition to deliver some of these on rather small clients. And we'll go into the differences between community and enterprise and professional later in the presentation. You can use Open-AudIT Community. However, I really recommend that you step up to Open-AudIT Professional, and we'll talk about why. And then, of course, there's Opie Config. Now, where NMIS and Open-AudIT Community come as free and open source solutions, Professional, Open-AudIT Professional, and Enterprise, of course, are commercially licensed, and Opie Config only comes as a commercially licensed product. All right, installing and configuring Open-AudIT and Opie Config. So one of the first questions you kind of have to ask yourself internally is, what features and functionality of Open-AudIT do you need, right? So Open-AudIT comes in three different licensing levels: a free and open source community edition, a commercially licensed professional edition, which is reasonably priced, and an enterprise edition, which, because of the types of features and functionality that it brings to the table, is a little more expensive. However, when you start looking at the what information it gives you, the ability to scale horizontally with multiple collectors, the ability to do file and folder auditing, the ability to do hardware baselining as well, also do configurable role-based access and have full access to a RESTful API. Those types of features and functionality can really make enterprise a worthwhile investment, especially for a consulting team. So irregardless of which licensing level you want to go for, they all come in one installer. So it's important to note that when you install Open-AudIT, you get Community, Professional, and Enterprise all in one package. The features of Professional and Enterprise are unlocked by adding a license key to it. Again, Professional comes with a free 20-device license key built into it, and that's free 20 devices for life. So if you're only ever going to be auditing a network with 20 devices on it, you're good to go. You can use the Professional 20-device license either in a lab environment, in a deployed production environment if you want to. You can use it in your home lab if you want to. I know many engineers spin up Open-AudIT to kind of keep an idea on what's in their home networks. So if you're looking to do a deployment of Open-AudIT or Opie Config and/or Opie Config, you can absolutely download the installers and install them on your own operating systems. And we'll get into what those look like in a minute. However, if you're doing a proof of concept, if you're doing a test, or even if you're deploying into a client atmosphere, I've often find it's much easier to start with the Opmantic virtual machine. Some people call it the Opmantic appliance. That's because it comes with everything already pre-installed on it. So it has NMIS, it has Open-AudIT, it has Opie Config, it has other solutions as well, like Opie Charts, Opie Reports, Opie Flow as well. You don't have to use those other tools, but the nice thing is that by starting with the virtual machine, you know that you have your databases are installed, your baseline configurations of all your software is done, everything's already interconnected in the back end. You don't have to follow lengthy install tutorials and answer questions during installers. You can just take that VM, go to the client site or give them a download link and say, please spin up a virtual machine, please size it like this, and then you could go into that machine and then do whatever configuration you need. The most recent build of the Opmantic VM comes from this past September 2018, so it's relatively new. It is based still on CentOS 6.9. We are looking at doing either a CentOS 7 or moving to a Debian operating system for our next release. We're still talking about that internally and trying to see where the market as a whole is moving. Obviously, it's moving more towards RHEL 7 as it becomes more and more stable with each release. You can get the opmantic virtual machine directly from the opmantic.com downloads page, so feel free to go there. It does come out as an OVA file, and you can, depending on what your VM host is, you can convert that for different types of interoperability, and that is covered in our wiki for that. The VM itself, right out of the box, is sized for what we call a small deployment. So it's got it's pre-sized for 2 virtual CPU, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and it has 2 40-gigabyte hard drives, one for operating systems and programs, and one for the data partition. We do recommend, and we'll talk about sizing in a minute, that this has to be resized. The VM has to be resized when you deploy it. That'll really all be driven by the total number of devices you'll be auditing, how many subnets you're auditing, and how fast you have to complete an audit. So if you're trying to do 5,000 devices and you want to get it done in a 24-hour turnaround, you'll have to have a bigger machine than if you were just doing 1,000 devices and you had a week to kind of do it after hours. Again, you can install Open-AudIT onto a server of your choice. Open-AudIT does have installers available for both Windows or Linux. It does, however, require a 64-bit operating system. We've had some clients who have tried to shoehorn this onto a 32-bit OS. It will not function. There are really no differences in audit capabilities between installing Open-AudIT on a Windows or a Linux server. It runs the same on both. The features and functionality are the same. I will say, however, that Linux, installing Open-AudIT on a Linux server, discovering Windows machines will run slightly faster. If you're also looking to consider installing Opie Config and understanding the differences between the two, right? So Open-AudIT will do a hardware and a software audit of your devices, where Opie Config will look at networking type devices, routers, switches, hubs, firewalls, load balancers, those types of hardcore networking devices, and pull configuration information by running CLI commands like show running config, and it will store that configuration information in the database for you to reference later. Opie Config only comes with an installer for a Linux operating system. There's no Windows compatible install for Opie Config. Now you can, of course, spin up a Linux VM inside a Windows machine. So that's perfectly fine. If you want to go that route, that works as well. If you're going to be using both Open-AudIT and Opie Config for an audit, I really recommend that you install them both on the same machine, which means obviously it would have to be on a Linux platform because Opie Config doesn't do a Windows install. So server resources, kind of how do you size the machine? And again, whether this is going back and resizing the opmantic virtual machine or virtual appliance, whatever kind of nomenclature you want to use, or whether this is sizing a VM and then installing Open-AudIT and Opie Config on it. Really, at the end of the day, sizing is it's not a science. It's part science, but it's really part voodoo mysticism, right? It all comes down to how many total numbers of devices do you have, what are the total number of subnet audits being run and their size. So if you're auditing a /16, but you know that there's really only 100 devices on that /16, you're going to be looking at an awful lot of IP addresses that are going to have to time out the audit before it moves on to the next IP address. So understanding how long those types of audits will run and your options for splitting up those really, really large subnets, your /16s, your /12s, your /8s, into much, much smaller /19s, let's say, to be able to audit them within smaller time constraints and then running multiple audits simultaneously. And then also understanding how fast you need your audits to be completed. So it's important to set good expectations both with your team, the auditing team itself, and with the client about how long it's going to take an audit to run and how many days it might take, especially if you're working with something like a smaller laptop that you're joining to the client's domain. A good example to think about, we've got several really large MSP clients One of them in particular is auditing about 1,200 total subnets, a total of 50,000 devices every 12 hours. So they're doing it twice within a 24-hour period with any given day. But that server has 24 virtual CPU and 36 gigabytes of RAM, and it has a very, very big dedicated pipe interface in and out of that server in order to have that many subnet discoveries going simultaneously. They're running 10 to 15 subnet scans at the same time, and the server has to be able to respond, and it has to have a very, very fast storage system as well to be able to write information into the database system that's coming back from the scans. So setting that kind of top end, that biggest of big kind of servers aside, we really recommend starting with the concept of something with about 80 gigabytes of hard drive. So you could leave the virtual machines 40 and 40. You could leave that alone to start with. Set it for anywhere from 4 to 6 virtual CPU and 6 to 8 gigabytes of RAM. That should be able to handle anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 devices. It really depends on how responsive the devices are, and again, how many subnet audits you want to run simultaneously. Of course, if you're dealing with multiple locations, you could either use Open-AudIT Enterprise with collector servers, or you could deploy multiple standalone servers and then merge the reports together from those individual standalone implementations. So lots of different options here for deployment. Some of it just comes down to trial and error, right? And each client's network is going to be different. Some networks are going to have a lot of latency. Some networks are going to have very, very kind of overloaded or overtaxed devices that are slow in responding to audits. Other client sites, you're going to have to work through network security issues or firewall or antivirus issues with machines and understand what might be stopping or slowing down audits. And you want to be able to take all of that into consideration when you're before your first few audits that you do. So how do you plan your audit? And this is something that many times people who don't think kind of step procedurally or logically get lost in, right? And it's that old anecdote, how do you eat an elephant, right? It's just one bite at a time. And so what I've tried to do here and on the next couple of slides is just break out really what my thought process is, both before I go to a site, so planning for your audit, and then on the next screen, we're going to talk about actually executing the audit itself. So planning for the audit, right? Number one step, you have to work with the client's IT team, their network team, to make sure that the network is configured appropriately to allow the audits. So there's a link there under item number 1 that goes into detail about the ports and protocols that Open-AudIT uses and requires open and available and how they work together to complete an audit. You also want to make sure that the client has configured their devices properly to respond to an audit. So something as simple as having Windows Defender on, Windows Firewall, having an antivirus program installed on the device, rejecting inbound connections, blanketly. All of those things have to be worked through so that devices can respond to an audit, whether it's responding via SNMP or an SSH connection, an SSH session for a Linux or Unix device, or whether it's a Windows type device that has to allow a WMI connection from the Windows or from the Open-AudIT server rather, and then allow WMI commands to be executed, and even the auditing scripts to be downloaded and stored and executed on those machines. So again, under item number 2, we have a link there as well to the target client configuration page, which goes into detail about that. So once you've provided that information to your client, again, whether that's an internal client, an internal line of business that you're working with, it might be your own client, might be your own team, doesn't matter. You could be working as an MSP or as a consultant, an auditing team. You still have to provide that type of information to your client so they can prepare their network and prepare their devices to respond to the audit appropriately. Number 3, you want to work with your client to collect a complete list of all subnets or AD controllers. So if the client is using Microsoft Active Directory, you can actually connect to an AD controller and the controller will actually return a list of all the subnets that it manages, and Open-AudIT will use that list of subnets from the AD controller to populate the list of subnets. Or you can have your client give you a list of subnets. You also need your client to give you a list of credentials. Now, I didn't provide a link here to the Open-AudIT wiki page that talks about device credentials, but we do accept SNMP version 1, 2C, and 3 for SNMP work. We also take SSH user accounts, and that could be an admin or a sudo account or an SSH key. And again, SSH is used to communicate with Linux and Unix type devices. So we do not use SSH on network devices. So that's important. When it comes to Open-AudIT, we do not use SSH for network devices, but opConfig does. So opConfig can either use SSH or Telnet to communicate with a network type device. And then finally, Open-AudIT also needs WMI credentials, right? So it needs to have a Windows administrator set of credentials for that device to be able to audit that device and put the auditing script on it, run the WMI commands, and pull a full list of information from it. One of the last things you want to do with your client, kind of as preparation, is understand if they want to be able to have you really audit their software licensing. So I'm not talking about just pulling back a list of what's installed. You can do that without having to interact with your client at all. But what I'm saying is if the client says, hey, I've purchased 10 copies of Microsoft Office Professional 2013. I have 10 copies of that. When Open-AudIT audits all those machines, it can tell you how many copies of Microsoft Office Professional 2013 it found, and compare that with the number that you told it that they actually had. And we'll show you that in a minute, what that looks like. So if the client wants you to look at their software licensing and kind of queue that up and be able to compare that side by side, then the client, you need to be able to collect that information from the client. What software have they purchased, or can they show that they've purchased? So the kind of the next bite that you take after you've gotten all those pieces off to the client, the client's come back and said, yep, we've adjusted our network security, we've installed your virtual machine, we've gone ahead and we've adjusted the target clients in accordance to the documentation you gave us. The next thing to do is to go back and confirm that the client network has been configured to allow audits and configuration collection. So I know you're kind of repeating yourself here, right? Because the client just came back and said, hey, everything's ready to go. But you really want to confirm that, right? You want to be able to validate that. And really the easiest way to do that is with number 5. It's to select not necessarily a subnet, but pick a subset of devices, pick 3, 4, 5 devices. And you can ask your client to give you the IP addresses or the fully qualified domain names of them. But give you a small subset of devices and try to audit those devices individually from Open-AudIT. Really, do a test on a on a router, on a switch, on a firewall, on a Windows device, on a Linux device, and make sure that Open-AudIT can audit those devices, can pull everything back from it. With item number 5, I've provided a link to the troubleshooting page on the Open-AudIT wiki. The troubleshooting page will take you literally step by step through everything you need to do if an audit is not returning the information you think it should. So lots of pieces in there, and then the troubleshooting page, of course, cross-links over to other pieces like blessed subnets, connections like target client configuration, also information about ports and protocols, that kind of stuff. So once you've got a good small subset of devices ready to go, what you would do is you would add in the list of all the subnets you want to audit. You'd add in all your credentials, obviously. You would then schedule audits and also configuration collection. So the way everything works, Open-AudIT reaches out, scans each subnet, goes down each IP address, figures out what's there, audits it, and then at some point, a list of all those devices that Open-AudIT found would then be sent from Open-AudIT into opConfig. At that point, opConfig would then take those devices and, again, on some schedule, look to pull and execute command line commands, CLI commands, against that list of devices and try to pull all the CLI commands that it can, depending on the manufacturer, model, and operating system of the device. Once that's done, you want to verify your audits and configuration collection. If you need to go back to step 5 again, do more troubleshooting. You may find some subnets or some individual devices were not properly configured to allow the audits to run. So it can be a kind of a recursive process there between step 6 and step 5, where you're going back and forth for a little bit until you get all the information you need. Once step 7 is done and you've verified all your audits and configuration collections completed, your final step really in doing a drop and scrape is to produce all the outbound reports. Pull all the information out of the database in the formats that you'll be using it to format and give back to your client again. The final step after that, after you've had those communications with the client, when you're done with your engagement, the last step really is to wipe your databases. We have a link here that'll go back to the Open-AudIT site that talks about how to wipe the Open-AudIT database. You can back it up. You can wipe it completely. It really depends on what your engagement contract is with your client. Keeping in mind that you'll have proprietary information from your client, right? So you'll have all the information about their network devices, all of their ports and protocols, how their devices are configured, and you'll also have all the credential sets for their devices. From a security and risk avoidance standpoint, as a consultant myself, what I want to do is I want to wipe that database, and I might even go so far as to overwrite the hard drive on the machine. It's one of the reasons why I really prefer, when doing these types of activities, that I have the client provide the hardware and then I install the Audmantic virtual machine on the client's hardware. That way, the client's kind of proprietary information never leaves the client site, especially when it comes to the credentials and access to their devices, never leaves the client site. And then it's the client's responsibility to wipe that VM, right? As opposed to walking in with maybe a small 1U rack server or a micro mini server, like a little HP micro, and then join that to the domain, or even a laptop and join that domain, and then you have to walk out with that. Many clients won't like that concept. So unless you have an ongoing relationship with them, that could be a kind of a sticking point in the conversation. So what do the audit results look like? So I'm going to step away from the PowerPoint now, and I'm going to flip over to Open-AudIT and then Opie Config. We're going to take a quick look at some of the information that we get from those tools. So I'm in, this is the Open-AudIT Enterprise dashboard. This same dashboard is available in the Professional Edition as well. You get these nice, pretty charts and graphs that are available. In the top right-hand corner, you also have a whole list of additional dashboards that you can choose from. So depending on what kind of a view you want to provide your client. If you have the Enterprise Edition, you have some additional dashboards that you don't get in Professional, and you also have the opportunity to create your own dashboards and even create your own dashboard charts and graphs as well. So right off the bat, just a couple of simple reports that I like to run and provide back to my client. It also gives me the opportunity to have a conversation with them. So this is the report hardware device report. This gives you a complete breakdown of every device that Open-AudIT has found and audited in the system. It'll even give you a breakdown of devices that it's found. So for example, this device, it's done an audit on this device in the second row, but it really hasn't gotten a manufacturer model or serial number information from it. So this device really hasn't completed an audit, but it's still included in the list of devices that are here. I like this as a starting point for conversation, especially if I can interact with it while I'm talking with my customer. Very simply, in the top right, I've got a nice little search window, and this is actually going to search through every column that's shown here for this report. So if I wanted to search for Windows, I could start typing Win. It'll give me all my Windows machines, right? So I say I've got one Windows 10 and one Windows 2008 server. And if I drill into that 2008 server, we'll take a quick look at what that looks like. So I've got my background information. I can see that this is a VMware hosted device. I've got my name. I've got all my DNS details as well. I've got my operating system group, name, version, how many processors, how much memory I have available here. This is also going to break down. I can drill into, again, details about my processors, and whether this is virtual or put on a piece of iron, I'll get the same type of detail. Processors, memory, BIOS, motherboard, network cards, disk drives. I'll get my local drives, I'll get my map drives, I'll get my RAID arrays and all the drives that are in them. I'll get map drives. I'll even get a list of shares. So if this machine is sharing out a directory or a folder or an entire drive, I'll get a list of shares as well. Any optical drives, any video cards, any sound cards. Because this is a VM, I'm not getting a report about a keyboard, mouse, or the monitors. I will get those as separate line items under the hardware section. I'll also get a full list of all my software. So again, this is all available to me live within the system. I can export all of this information in multiple different formats. So I can export this out as a JSON file, as an XML file, as an Excel file, as a CSV file. So depending on what information I want, I can parse this information out. But for me, it all starts at report, hardware, device, and kind of that level. One of the other pieces that I find really useful when talking to clients is understanding elevated privileges. The concept that there may be local administrator accounts on machines, and then using that as an opportunity to talk about hardening the client's network, removing those local administrator accounts, or reducing who has access to them. Not having 5, 6, 7 administrator accounts on machines, but also keeping track of things like remote desktop accounts, sudo accounts that are in the wheel list on Linux machines, and making sure that everyone who's in there is still active employees of the company. They're still gainfully employed. They still need to have administrative access, and then working with the client to move those out of local administrator accounts and move them into more of an LDAP account where users might have a day-to-day a general user account access, and then an admin account that they would use only for administrative functions in the network. Another report that I often find helpful is report network consumed IP addresses. So this actually gives me a breakdown of every router, switch, hub, firewall, every IP address that's out there, what devices have those IP addresses, and it gives me those IP addresses in a couple of different formats. It gives me both an IP address and it gives me an IP padded format as well. Now, it's important to understand too that if you're running the Enterprise Edition, that any of these reports that I'm showing you can be pulled through the Open-AudIT API. So you can actually execute these from an API call and return this information in JSON format by calling the actual report. And it'll just come back out in JSON format, and so you can feed that into other services as well. Another report I like, report network interfaces used. You'll notice under this report drop down here in Open-AudIT, there's about 40 reports that ship with Open-AudIT currently. You can also take an existing report, modify it, add more columns, remove columns you don't need. You can create your own reports very quickly. We have that very well documented, again, on the Open-AudIT Wiki. Very quick to do. We have a lot of sample reports that you can actually copy and paste the report structure and add a new report in just minutes. So again, this is the interfaces used or available report. And so this one goes interface by interface. So you'll see there are several entries for each machine, one entry for every single interface. It'll give you the alias, the index number of the interface, the description of the interface, the admin status, whether it's enabled or not, how long it's been up, and then it'll tell you whether that interface is available or used. And so the nice thing here is I could simply do a search for available. Again, I'm just using the search box in the top right-hand corner. And now it's reduced my list, and it's going to give me a list of all the available interfaces on all the devices across my network. So a nice little shortcut for me there. If I'm looking for an interface to plug something into, or if I'm looking for IP addresses, I can go the other direction on the IP address report and see if what IP addresses are available for me. If you had that conversation about software with your client and they said, you know what, I really want to keep track of my software licensing. You might also have a software license report similar to the one that you see on the screen. So you'll see here that we've preloaded this with some software pieces like Apache, Microsoft Office Professional 2013, Microsoft Word, Apple Keynote, and a few others. And the way this works, if I want to take a drill in here, I'm just going to click the Details button on Office Professional. If we take a look here, you'll see in the top right-hand side where it says match string, we're actually searching for a piece of text within the license key. We're looking for the word Microsoft Office Professional 2013 and then a percentage. And the reason we're looking for, we added the percent, kind of the wildcard percent there, is that if you look down at what got returned down here in the center bottom, you'll see that the one copy we found that was installed is named -en-us. So this is a US English version of Microsoft Professional 2013. And we didn't want to break it up, our licensing up by what regional language it was. We could have been more specific. We could actually say Microsoft Professional 2013 -ENUS and look just for the English versions, but instead we just want to kind of put them all together. And if I go back to licenses, you'll see in this list, it talks about how many I've told it, how many licenses I told the system were purchased, and then how many it actually found. So in the example of the MySQL database server, the first row, I've told it we've purchased 3, and it says it's found 6 that are installed. Later on down here, you can see under Flash plugin, I've told it that it's not to be installed anywhere. That's the description I gave it. I told it that there was 0 purchased. So you can actually give a 0 number. And in this case, there was 1 installed out there. So lots of different pieces. And then we actually had a question the other day about OpenSSH. So a client said, oh, well, what if I wanted to look for not necessarily a program like Microsoft Office, but just a library? And so we wanted to look for OpenSSH server. And it came back and it gave us different software version numbers depending on the operating system that this was installed on. And so this can actually be used to help drive a kind of a workforce job. So if you had to track down a specific version of, for example, OpenSSH server and upgrade it, you could start with this list, export this to Excel, sort it by or filter it by the software version you're looking for, and then have yourself a list of every single machine that has to be upgraded. So very, very quick to do. The last piece here is manage baselines. Baselines is a feature, again, where you can specify a minimum hardware standard for devices. So you might say that every single Windows 10 machine has to have this configuration and these 15 programs installed. And so you can define what that looks like. You can run that baseline after an audit. So you would run the audit first, and then upon completion of the discovery and the audit of the machines, you'd then schedule and run a baseline test. The baseline would then populate and tell you what's going on. So for example, back in July, it ran an audit on Windows computers. It found 28 pieces of software passed and 117 failed. So I can actually export this by policy or export it by device. I can also view that in line here live on the system. Again, baselines is a feature only of the enterprise edition, so you do have to license at the enterprise level. You do not have the opportunity to use baselines in professional or in community. Moving on to Opie Config. And again, this is just a small subset of the reports that are available in Open-AudIT. There's a whole lot more that's in there, and you can build your own reports. Lots of features and functionality in there that we're not even touching on today. In Opie Config, there's really 3 or 4 different things that I want to be able to use Opie Config for when I'm looking at a drop and scrape audit. Now, one of the big things for Opie Config is to be able to alert you whenever a device's configuration changes. And that's fantastic. But if I'm doing a drop and scrape, what I'm really doing is I'm just going to collect the state of the configurations of the devices today. And some of that is I may want to be able to take that information and back it up and archive it because I want to have a future conversation with the client. I want to be able to analyze that information, take a look at the configurations and see if we can improve the quality of the network by really tightening up the quality of the way the devices are organized and set out there. We'll start with views, nodes report. So this is going to really give me a list of the commands that were collected by device. it's important to keep in mind that opConfig is collecting configurations from generally networking type equipment, routers, switches, hubs, firewalls, load balancers, those types of devices. You can conceivably create a set of permissions and configurations and commands to collect from Linux type machines and also from Windows type workstations and servers if you wanted to. Generally speaking, though, opConfig is really focused on networking type devices. So you can see in this report, it breaks down the name of the machine, the operating system it found, the last command that was run, the last version that was taken, and if there were any errors that were reported in those. All of these, of course, are live, so you can drill into any of these. So, for example, last command change, show IP interface, show running config. Let's drill into that. You can see that we've the last time it tried to run was on 10/30. The last update was on 6/07, so June 7. So this hasn't run properly in 4 months now. There's an unknown error. I can run this command now if I wanted to, and we can scroll through and we can see what that running config is on that device. So a lot of good information here. And again, that's commands collected by device and organizing through and understanding what pieces are there. The next one that you might want to look at is going to be Views Commands Overview. So this gives me a breakdown of, again, every single device, the command, the revision that was stored, and it'll put this in date order, right? So it'll keep building this list out as it executes commands and collects information from devices. You do have this a great little search window up in the top right-hand corner. So if you want to search for, again, against any of these columns, so for example, you might search against a command, and you might say, I want to show all show running config commands or show startup config commands, and kind of winnow this away to just the list of pieces you want. You can also do an advanced piece and combine nodes, commands, command text, node operating systems, and revisions. So you can do a lot of really good parsing of information through this piece. And then, of course, again, you can still drill into that command. So show running config. I can pull into this command because I do have monitor configuration changes enabled. Oop, I don't have any previous configurations for this. That's great. So I have I have one command here. But generally speaking, depending on the device, as it collects commands, I can pull back previous commands from these devices as well. The last piece that you want to consider is if you've done anything with the compliance set in opConfig. So opConfig has the capability of defining a compliance set of rules. So things that should be configured in your devices but are not, and things that should not be configured in devices but are. So for example, on row 1 here, we've loaded the Cisco NSA rule set, so that ships with opConfig. We also have a very good wiki that helps you develop your own configuration compliance sets as well. But you can see here in this example, we have multiple exception hits. For example, do not use both enable password and enable secret. Interface should have proxy ARP disabled. Password encryption should be enabled. Unencrypted passwords should be reset. So it'll give us a full list of everything that's wrong, everything that's happened. And then what we call OK hits. These are things that are supposed to be there and we found there. These things that are okay, these are the things that you expect to have that are there. But you can see that we have a full breakdown on all of our devices here, based again on this Cisco NSA policy set that's been installed. Again, I do want to stress that this isn't all that opConfig or OP reports can do for you. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can email support@opmantic.com. You can email me directly, markh@opmantic.com. If you have sales inquiries, email usa@opmantic.com. We're happy to answer any questions you have, help you get set up for a proof of concept. Even if you're just looking at using the Open-AudIT Community Edition, the free and open source version, reach out to us. We're happy to give you a demo, talk pros and cons about the different licensing levels, give you very competitive pricing on the product as well, and then you can make the decision yourself over whether licensing a commercial edition is to your benefit or not. So I thank you all very much for your time today. I hope you found this presentation useful to you. And again, thank you for your time.